Welcome to week 3 of 4th grade. This week it is all about fiction. Being able to analyze characters in a fictional text is a very important skill. Helps you understand what's going on in the story, helps you understand and get to know the characters better. So, there are certain things we look for when we want to learn about a character or begin to understand them. And fiction holds the most memorable characters. I think of Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. I think of all of the characters in The Wind in the Willows. You like Harry Potter, Diary of the Wimpy Kid. Think of all the characters in all the books you've ever read. Essentially all the friends we've met between the pages of a book. We want to understand those characters a little bit more. We learn about the story characters by paying attention to the details in the story. We observe these, we listen to them, and we make note of their thoughts and ideas. We can also learn a lot by noticing how other people react to them. Are they someone that people like hanging out with? Are they someone people don't trust? There are all kinds of things that we can look at when we're studying character. What's their name? Their age? What's their background? Their history? What does the character think about or talk about? How do others describe the character? What do others say about the character? What does the character look like? What feelings does the character express? How does he interact with others? And how does he himself describe others? Is he a positive person? Is he a negative person? Is he grumpy? All of these observations tell us everything about the character in our books. So right now, I'm going to read a page to you. I've talked about this book a lot, The Red-Tailed Angels, and it really is a good book. I had to confess, remember I didn't read it last year, but I read it this year, and I'm glad I'm getting to share it with you. I'm going to read to you about the main character, one of them, and listen carefully. Listen for his character traits. Charlie felt the weight of many people on his shoulders, but he had merely nodded and given Pop a quick hug. He ran to the bus waiting for him and refused to look back. He wanted his father to see the fear on his face, the fear that was coursing through his whole body. Now as he sat in the dark of the barracks, Charlie felt that same overwhelming dread. Tomorrow morning his squadron was shipping out, and despite months of training filled with countless practice missions, Charlie wondered if he was really ready. A man heading into war was like a blind man walking along the edge of a cliff. Would he sense and successfully respond to the dangers around him, or would one misstep lead him to death? After he fell asleep, Charlie dreamt of his home back in Philly, his head filled with images of his old room at Penn and warm afternoons spent studying on the university lawn. A dedicated student and an avid reader, Charlie was rarely seen without a book in his hands. And while this may have helped him graduate with honors and ace all of his written exams at the civilians pilot school, now it was also the cause of a lot of teasing by the other men in the barracks. So I've just read you about a page and a half of this book. And in just that little bit, the author has told us a lot about Charlie. Let's see if we can figure it out. So, what's his name, his age, and his history? Well, we've learned that he grew up in Philly, and we've learned that he's graduated from college, so he's in his 20s. We know that he likes to read. He's an avid reader. We know that he was a good student. Those are the ways others described him. And his feelings, it said he had the weight of the world on his shoulders, so he took on a sense of responsibility. He carried others, not in a physical sense, but in a literal sense, and he wanted not to let people down, and he wanted to build them up and protect them and serve them. And it says he left his dad quickly without looking back. I don't want to tell you how it begins. I want you to read that. So, oops, I'll leave that part out. So in just a page and a half, look at how much we learned about Charlie. This week's little reader's response in Seesaw I read to you about another character named Tex that is very interactive with Charlie in this book. I'll read aloud the last two paragraphs on page 4 and 5, and as I read them, you'll jot down the characteristics you learn about Tex. His name is Tex. Now I'll tell you this. His name is Tex because he is the largest man, the tallest man, the biggest, strongest man in this squadron. But he is not from Texas. They called him Tex because he's the biggest. Well, Texas is the biggest state that we've been looking at in history. Some of you knew that fact already. And so they nicknamed him Tex. That's how he got his nickname. But you'll learn more about him, and I'll read that section to you in Seesaw so that you can write down the character traits that you hear about Tex. And then we can compare Charlie to Tex. Another thing that's important this week that we're looking at today, two things. Today we're talking about characters and we're talking about the setting. Sometimes the setting plays a big part in the book. I don't know if any of you have read the fiction book Holes, where the boys are sent out into this desert and they have to dig. And they dig and they dig and they dig holes all day long. Well, that story has to take place in a desert where they can dig. There's no other setting for that. Stories that take place where they get lost in the mountains couldn't get lost in the mountains if the story didn't take place in the mountains. Setting is very important. In this story, The Red-Tailed Angels, you're going to analyze a little bit of the setting there. The text states that the setting is the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama. I like saying Tuskegee, Alabama, in April of 1943. We can use the text, and I can use my background knowledge to figure out that's a military base. I can figure that out because my dad was in the Air Force, so I have some schema here. My brother-in-law was a pilot, also in the Air Force, and flew, and he liked to do tricks when he flew. So I've been up there when he was doing tricks like you'll hear that Tex does in this book. I also tend to watch Good Morning America, and the host of that show, Robin Roberts, I think her father was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. So that's pretty cool. All those connections, and I'm sure you have some too, so you could figure out that it was an air base. And it took place in the United States during World War II. The soldiers are likely preparing to fight the Germans. That tells me that the characters know they have a very important mission ahead of them. Jobs that might take them to dangerous places around the world. So the setting plays a big part. We wouldn't know if it wasn't taking place during the war, if it wasn't these pilots training, the story would be completely different. So we look for time, we look for date words, we look for details in the text. You look at the picture, you make inferences. I'm sure you studied inferencing in 3rd grade, but later this week we'll retouch on inferencing. What can you infer? What can you read between the lines? But we'll talk about that more. I can't wait. The setting also influences the story. They're in camp, they're fighting, they're in war. That's going to influence a lot of things. And you can visualize it. They talk about flying. You can imagine what it would be like to be up there flying through the clouds. You might even infer some of their thoughts, some of their fears. The story changes too between how they act. There's a character that comes in who treats the pilots one way, and then after a big battle they run into that character again and he treats the pilots another way. So because of something that happened, the setting changed and they were treated differently. So you'll be able to discover that. You'll also be able to discover the mood of the story. There are times in the story where the men are laughing and cutting up. There are times when they're sad about leaving their families. There are times when they're afraid. And then there's a different time at the end. I'm attaching this book in Seesaw for you, and hopefully the benchmark link will work. I was able to copy it, and I hope that it will work. So enjoy studying the characters and enjoy studying the setting as you read this book this week. This is Monday. We have a lot more in store, so I'll see you soon.